Good morning, Jean. How are you today?
Good morning, Tracy. I'm good.
Alright, so I know we are both familiar with literature, right?
Of course, it's very much familiar. We already encountered literature when we were in high school and even in elementary
Yes,
days.
yes, exactly.
So, since we already know literature, we can share it between both of us, allowing us to deepen our understanding about literature. Can we?
Of course, why not? Let's explore today the essence and functions of literature, its main divisions, so as well the characteristic of each type of genre.
Okay, let's go first with the essence and functions of literature. What can you share about it?
Hmm, Truly, we need to study literature in order for us to trace the rich heritage of ideas handed down to us from our forefathers. How can we appreciate something if we do not understand it?
Yes, JC. We cannot appreciate something if we do not understand first. If we do not immerse ourselves in the history and background of a certain thing.
And like other races of the world, we need to understand that we have a great and noble tradition which can serve as the means to assimilate others' culture.
Yes, we do need to fully comprehend not only our culture, but also those of others.
Yes, indeed. And as Filipinos who truly love and take part in our own culture, we have to manifest our deep concern for our own literature, and this we can do by studying the literature of the country.
Yeah, that's right. And we have already done it right now since we are exploring literature.
Exactly. And did you know that literature has two main divisions?
Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, it is prose and poetry.
Yes, you're right. Prose typically consists of full grammatical sentences that builds paragraphs.
And poetry, on the other hand, typically contains a metrical scheme and often some element of rhyme.
All right. Now, allow me to share with you the types of prose that I know. There are many types of prose, and these include the following: novel, short story, play, legend, fable, anecdote, essay, biography, news, and oration. But for now, let us go first to novel. Novel is a long narrative divided into chapters that tackles true to life stories. An example of this is the famous Noleme Tangere, in English, Catch Me Not, written by no other than our national hero, Jose Rizal. Now, let's go to short story. A short story is a narrative prose that is usually centered around one single event that involves one or more characters. Example: The Telltale Heart, written by Edgar Allan Poe. Next, play. Play is presented on a stage, is divided into acts, and each act has many scenes. An example of this is Les Miserables. Next, legend. Legend, these are unverified stories, usually about origins. An example of this is Why the Piña Has 100 Eyes by Nini Santa Romina Cruz. Next, fable. These are fictitious narratives. The characters in the story are all animals who speak and act like people. Its purpose is to give moral lessons in the mind of children. Example is Why Dog Wag Their Tails by Mabel Cook Cole, written in 1916. Next, anecdote. Anecdote is a merely product of the writer's imagination, and the main purpose is to bring out lessons to the audiences. Example is Death in the Arctic by Robert W. Service. Next, essay. This expresses the viewpoint or opinion of the writer about a certain issue or event. This may be seen in an editorial page in the newspaper. Next, biography. Biography is a detailed description of a person's life. Example is The First Filipino, written by Leon Maria Guerrero. This is an award-winning biography of our Philippine national hero, Jose Rizal. Next, news. News is a report of everyday events in society, government, science, and industry. This may be provided through many different media. Next, oration. Oration is a formal treatment of a subject and is intended to be spoken in public. That would be all about prose. Your turn now, Jean. Do you have something to share about poetry?
Yes, of course. Just like prose, poetry also conveys a thought, describes a scene, or tells a story, but in a concentrated lyrical arrangement of words. And poetry has three types with their corresponding varieties. First is narrative poetry, second, lyric poetry, and third, dramatic poetry. Let's talk about narrative poetry. So there are three varieties of narrative poetry. First is epic. Epic is an extended narrative about heroic exploits, often under supernatural control. An example of an epic is The Iliad and Odyssey by Homer. Next, let's go to metrical tale. Metrical tale is a narrative which is written in a verse and can be classified either as a ballad or a metrical romance. An example of which is The Lady of the Lake by Walter Scott. Next is ballad, a narrative poem that is considered the shortest and the simplest. It has a simple structure and tells of a single incident. There are also variations of these: love ballads, war ballads, and sea ballads, humorous, moral, and historical or mythical ballads. In the early time, ballad referred to a song accompanying a dance. An example of ballad is The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. So that is the first type of poetry. Let's go to the second type of poetry, which is the lyric poetry. There are 7 varieties of lyric poetry. First is folk songs or awiting bayan. These are short poems intended to be sung. The common theme is love, despair, grief, doubt, joy, hope, and sorrow. I know we are much familiar with this because we encountered this when we were in elementary and in high school. An example is Bahay Kubo and Liron-Liron Sinta. Second varieties is sonnet. Sonnet is a lyric poem of 14 lines dealing with an emotion, a feeling, or an idea. These are 2 types, the Italian and the Shakespearean. An example of Shakespearean is Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Written by William Shakespeare. Next is elegy. Elegy is a lyric poem which expresses feelings of grief and melancholy, and whose theme is death. An example is Lycidas by John Milton. Let's proceed to the ode. Ode is a poem of a noble feeling expressed with dignity, with no definite number of syllables or definite number of lines in a stanza. One of the famous examples of this is from John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn. Let's proceed to Psalm or Tallet, a song praising God or the Virgin Mary and containing a philosophy of life. One of the example is, "The Lord is my shepherd." Next is song or awit. These have measures of 12 syllables and slowly sung to the accompaniment of a guitar or bandurria. One of the example of this is Florante at Laura, which we encountered when we were in, I think, grade 8 by Francisco Balagtas. Next is corridos. Corridos have measures of 8 syllables and recited to a martial beat. An example of this is Ibong Adarna. If I'm not mistaken, we encountered this when we were in grade 7. Then the last type of poetry is dramatic poetry. And dramatic poetry have 5 varieties. First variety is comedy. Comedy comes from the Greek term komos, meaning festivity or revelry. This form usually is light and written with the purpose of amusing, and usually has a happy ending. An example is Eyes Don't Lie. Next is melodrama. This is usually used in musical plays with the opera. Today, this is related to tragedy, just as the farce is to comedy. It arouses immediate and intense emotion and is usually sad, but there is happy ending for the principal character. An example is The Odd Couple. Next is tragedy. This involves the hero struggling mightily against dynamic forces. He meets death or ruin without success and satisfaction obtained by the protagonist in a comedy. A famous example of this is Romeo and Juliet. Next is farce, an exaggerated comedy. It seeks to arouse mirth by laughable lines. Situations are too ridiculous to be true. The characters seem to be caricatures and the motives undignified and absurd. An example is by William Shakespeare, The Taming of the Shrew. And lastly is social poems. This form is either purely comic or tragic, and it pictures life of today. It aimed to bring about changes in social conditions. An example of this is A Place I Once Knew.
Thank you for that, Jean. And also, there are characteristics of each type of literary genre. Let's explore first the drama. Drama is a portrayal of fictional or non-fictional events through the performance of written dialogue, either prose or poetry. Essay, on the other hand, is a focused piece of writing designed to inform or persuade.
And poetry uses concentrated language, less words, more meaning. Uses figurative language, imagery, language of sounds, and rhythmical language. It may be rhyming or non-rhyming. And for the short story, it can be read in one sitting. It is based on the incident or character. It has usually few characters. It presents a conflict situation from which suspense arises. And the climax involves from the basic conflict, and it may not have a definite conclusion or an outcome or ending.
So with all the sharing, I think we already know more about literature.
Yeah, and it's good to know that our time isn't wasted because we've learned a lot from the exploration and sharing today. Thank you, Joycey, for the time spending with me.
Thank you also, Jean. May God bless us all. Bye. See ya.